Did you know Marlon Brando, Oliver Hardy, Alfred Hitchcock, and Jackie Gleason each tipped the scales at nearly 300 pounds? These weren't exceptions. They were icons. Golden Age Hollywood embraced bodies that would be ruthlessly criticized today. From heavyweight comedians to voluptuous sex symbols like Marilyn Monroe and Elizabeth Taylor, these stars proved that talent and screen presence mattered far more than waistlines. Here are 15 legendary figures whose bodies shaped cinema history. Marlon Brando, perhaps no transformation in the annals of cinema history has been as dramatic, as discussed, or as ultimately tragic as that of Marlon Brando. Standing at 5 feet 9 inches, the young Brando who burst onto the screen in the early 1950s was nothing short of a physical revelation. He had been an athlete in his youth, playing football with the kind of aggressive intensity that would later define his acting style. And he maintained his lean, muscular physique through bodybuilding and martial arts training. When he appeared in A Streetcar Named Desire in 1951, wearing that now iconic torn t-shirt, he weighed approximately 180 pounds of pure, raw, masculine energy. Women across America swooned, and men found themselves confronted with a new paradigm of male sexuality on screen. But Brando was never a man who cared much for what Hollywood expected of him. As the 1960s progressed, his interest in maintaining his physical appearance waned in direct proportion to his growing disillusionment with the film industry. He began to eat with abandon, famously indulging in midnight refrigerator raids and developing an almost defiant relationship with food. By the time Francis Ford Coppola cast him as the aging patriarch Vito Corleone in The Godfather in 1972, Brando had already begun his substantial weight gain, though cotton balls stuffed in his cheeks and careful costuming helped create the iconic look of the Don. It was during the production of Apocalypse Now in 1979 that Brando's physical transformation reached its most notorious point. He arrived in the Philippines weighing well over 300 pounds, a bloated, imposing figure that bore little resemblance to the beautiful young man who had revolutionized acting decades earlier. Coppola was forced to shoot him almost entirely in shadow, turning a production crisis into artistic innovation. The Colonel Kurtz that emerged on screen was a figure of nightmarish, almost mythological proportions, a man who had grown so large that he seemed to have absorbed the darkness of the jungle itself. In his final years, Brando became a recluse on his private Tahitian island, his weight continuing to fluctuate wildly, his public appearances rare and often shocking to those who remembered the Adonis of his youth. Yet, there was something almost noble in his complete rejection of Hollywood's physical expectations. He had proven his genius, had revolutionized the craft of acting, and had decided that his body was his own to do with as he pleased. Whether this was freedom or self-destruction remains a matter of debate, but it was undeniably, utterly Brando. Orson Welles. Orson Welles arrived in Hollywood as a wunderkind, a 25-year-old theatrical prodigy who had already terrified America with his War of the Worlds radio broadcast and was now being given carte blanche to make whatever film he wished. Standing a commanding 6 feet tall, Welles was never a slender man, even in his youth. His weight generally hovered between 200 and 250 pounds, but it was distributed across a frame that seemed built to dominate any room he entered. His deep, resonant voice, combined with his substantial physical presence, gave him an almost supernatural authority on screen. When he made Citizen Kane in 1941, Welles was already a hefty young man, but his weight only added to the sense that here was someone who lived life on a grand scale, who consumed experience with the same appetite he brought to fine food and wine. His transformation into the elderly Charles Foster Kane required extensive prosthetics and padding, but there was something prophetic about it. as if he were rehearsing for the man he would eventually become. Throughout his career, Wells used his size as a tool rather than treating it as a limitation. As the sinister Harry Lime in The Third Man, his bulk emerging from the shadows of post-war Vienna, he was menacing precisely because he was so substantial. In Touch of Evil, which he also directed, he played a corrupt police captain whose physical decay mirrored his moral corruption. He wore a fat suit and prosthetic nose, but underneath, his own considerable weight provided the foundation for the character's grotesque believability. What made Wells remarkable was that his weight never seemed to diminish his charisma or his romantic appeal. He was married to Rita Hayworth, one of the most beautiful women in Hollywood, and throughout his life, he attracted people to him with magnetic force. He ate and drank with gusto, approaching the pleasures of the table with the same intensity he brought to his art. His size became part of his legend, the physical manifestation of an appetite for life that could never be satisfied. When he appeared in later years on talk shows, larger than ever, and spinning magnificent yarns about his Hollywood adventures, audiences were captivated not in spite of his size, but because of it. He was simply too big, in every sense, for ordinary life. Elizabeth Taylor. In the collective memory of Hollywood, Elizabeth Taylor remains the embodiment of feminine beauty, a woman whose violet eyes and perfect bone structure launched 1,000 magazine covers. Standing 5 feet 4 inches tall, Taylor possessed what was considered the ideal figure of the 1950s and 60s. Her famous measurements reportedly 36, 24, 36, creating the hourglass silhouette that defined glamour in that era. In her prime, she weighed around 115 pounds, and her voluptuous curves in films like Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and Cleopatra established her as a global sex symbol. Yet Taylor's relationship with her body would become one of the most scrutinized and cruelly publicized aspects of her life. Her weight fluctuated dramatically over the decades, sometimes reaching over 180 pounds, and the tabloid press showed her no mercy. The same publications that had worshipped her beauty in her youth turned on her with vicious glee, printing unflattering photographs and making her weight a punchline on late-night television. It was a preview of the body-shaming culture that would later become endemic in celebrity coverage. What the tabloids failed to appreciate was the extraordinary toll that Taylor's life had taken on her body. She suffered from chronic back pain stemming from injuries sustained on film sets. She battled addiction to prescription painkillers. She underwent numerous surgeries, and she survived multiple bouts of life-threatening pneumonia. Her body was not simply a vessel for beauty to be maintained at all costs. It was a battlefield that bore the scars of an extraordinary life, lived under extraordinary pressure. In her later years, Taylor spoke frankly about her weight struggles, becoming an unlikely advocate for body acceptance at a time when such conversations were rare. She refused to apologize for her appetites or her appearance, approaching her physical changes with the same fierce independence she brought to everything else. When she appeared at the Academy Awards or at charity events for her AIDS activism, she did so as Elizabeth Taylor, full stop, daring anyone to reduce her to a number on a scale. Her legacy proves that even the most beautiful women in the world are not immune to body shaming, but it also demonstrates that true star power transcends physical appearance entirely. Sidney Greenstreet. The story of Sidney Greenstreet's film career is one of Hollywood's most remarkable late-blooming successes. He was 62 years old when he made his screen debut in The Maltese Falcon in 1941, having spent his entire adult life on the stage, standing 5 feet 10 inches and carrying a very solid 200 to 225 pounds on his substantial frame. Greenstreet stepped in front of the camera and immediately became one of the most recognizable character actors in film history. His corpulent figure was not merely a physical characteristic, it was the foundation of his entire screen persona. With his round, jowly face, his calculating expression, and his bulk draped in elegant suits, Greenstreet became the archetype of the sophisticated villain. There was nothing comedic about his weight. When he smiled his knowing smile and delivered his lines in that distinctive, cultured voice, audiences felt genuine menace emanating from the screen. His Casper, Gutman in The Maltese Falcon, obsessed with the titular bird and willing to commit any crime to obtain it, remains one of cinema's most memorable antagonists. The visual dynamic Greenstreet created with Peter Lorre, his frequent co-star, was a stroke of genius. Lorre was small, nervous, and weaselly, while Greenstreet was enormous, calm, and calculating. Together, they appeared in numerous films, including Casablanca, where Greenstreet's Ferrari operates in the shadows of Rick's Cafe. The contrast between their physical types created an instant visual shorthand for audiences, communicating character dynamics before a single word of dialogue was spoken. Greenstreet understood that his body was an instrument to be used in service of his art. He never attempted to minimize his size or apologize for it. Instead, he weaponized it, using his physical presence to create characters who seemed to take up more than their fair share of any room they entered. In a Hollywood that often demanded physical conformity, Greenstreet's success proved that talent and screen presence could transcend any limitation of appearance. W.C. Fields, the great comedian W.C. Fields, crafted an entire comedic universe from the raw materials of his own physical appearance. Standing 5 feet 9 inches tall and weighing around 180 pounds, he was never an obese man, but his distinctive silhouette became one of the most recognizable in American entertainment. The pot belly that protruded permanently from his waistcoat, the red, bulbous nose ravaged by rosacea and decades of heavy drinking, the perpetually flustered expression. These were not merely physical traits, but the building blocks of a comedic philosophy. Fields played a very specific type, the grouchy, misanthropic aristocrat, perpetually at war with a universe that seemed designed to frustrate him. His soft, rounded middle was central to this persona, suggesting a man who had once aspired to dignity but had long since surrendered to the indulgences of life. His waddling walk, his exasperated gestures, his way of addressing the world with barely concealed contempt, all of these were enhanced and amplified by his physical appearance. What made Fields brilliant was his ability to make his body the source of both comedy and pathos. There was something deeply human about this rumpled, dyspeptic figure, struggling to maintain his composure in a world filled with annoying children, nagging women, and petty bureaucrats. His physical comedy was precise and devastatingly timed, but it never descended into mere slapstick. Every stumble, every harumph, every defeated sag of his shoulders told a story about the human condition. The nose, in particular, became Fields's trademark, the subject of countless jokes, both in his films and in his public persona. He leaned into it completely, incorporating references to his drinking and his appearance into his act. In an era when comedians often hid behind personas that bore little resemblance to their real selves, Fields made his actual physical self the foundation of his comedy. The result was a body of work that remains funny nearly a century later, in no small part because its creator had the courage to make himself the joke. Oliver Hardy. As one half of the most successful comedy duo in film history, Oliver Hardy turned his substantial physique into comic gold. Standing 5 feet 8 inches and often weighing between 250 and 300 pounds, Hardy was, quite literally, the heavy in Laurel and Hardy. His rotund figure, His round and extraordinarily expressive face and his air of wounded dignity created a perfect comedic counterpoint to the thin, bewildered Stan Laurel. The physical contrast between the two men was the visual foundation of their comedy. Where Laurel was slight and seemingly boneless, flailing about in confusion, Hardy was solid and grounded, desperately trying to maintain his composure. This dynamic allowed for endless variations on a simple theme. Hardy's attempts to preserve his dignity, while his considerable bulk betrayed him through pratfalls, stuck doorways, and collapsing furniture. His famous tie-twiddle of exasperation, his slow burn of mounting frustration, were made infinitely funnier by the sheer physical presence that accompanied them. But Hardy was far more than just a fat man falling down. He was a subtle and skilled comedian who used his size with tremendous intelligence. His expressions, the way he could convey entire emotional journeys with a raised eyebrow or a wounded glance at the camera, elevated the slapstick into something approaching art. He played his weight not for mockery, but for sympathy, creating a character who genuinely believed he deserved better and was continually disappointed by reality. Off-screen, Hardy was, by all accounts, a gentle and generous man, beloved by his co-workers and devoted to his craft. His weight caused him significant health problems in his later years, ultimately contributing to his death in 1957. But the legacy he left behind transcends any physical limitation. In his hands, a heavy-set body became an instrument of joy, proof that the human form in all its varieties can be a source of laughter, sympathy, and profound entertainment. Alfred Hitchcock. Though he worked behind the camera, Alfred Hitchcock became one of the most recognizable figures in Hollywood history, his portly silhouette as famous as any leading man's face. Standing 5 feet 7 inches and weighing at his peak nearly 300 pounds, Hitchcock transformed his distinctive body into a brand, his rotund profile becoming synonymous with suspense, mystery, and macabre wit. Hitchcock's cameos in his own films became a beloved ritual for audiences, who would watch eagerly for the director's brief appearances. These moments were only possible because of his instantly recognizable shape. He would waddle past in a crowd scene, sit on a bus reading a newspaper, or appear in a photograph within the frame. His body became a signature as distinctive as his name, a promise to audiences that they were in the hands of a master. The director himself cultivated this image deliberately, appearing in promotional materials, on his television series, and in countless interviews. His dry, deadpan delivery of macabre jokes, combined with his unlikely physical appearance, created a persona of the jovial puppet master, a man who took delight in terrifying his audience while seeming like someone's favorite uncle. The contrast between his appearance and the dark content of his films was part of his genius for marketing. Throughout his career, Hitchcock struggled with his weight, reportedly trying numerous diets with limited success. Food was a recurring theme in his films, often associated with danger, desire, or death. Whether this reflected his own complicated relationship with eating remains a matter for biographers to debate. What is certain is that Hitchcock made his physical presence a central part of his artistic identity. In an industry that often demanded physical perfection from those in front of the camera, he proved that genius could come in any package. Charles Laughton. Among the great character actors of Hollywood's golden age, Charles Laughton stands out for his refusal to conform to any physical standard of leading man beauty. Standing 5 feet 9 inches and frequently weighing over 200 pounds, he was a stout, heavy man whose unique and unforgettable face became a canvas for some of cinema's most powerful characterizations. Laughton was never going to play romantic heroes or swashbuckling adventurers, and he knew it. Instead, he channeled his physical presence into roles that demanded emotional complexity and psychological depth. As Captain Bligh in Mutiny on the Bounty, his stocky frame and cold, pitiless expression created a villain audiences loved to hate. As Quasimodo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, buried under layers of prosthetic makeup, he delivered a performance of such heartbreaking humanity that audiences wept. His physique was not a limitation, but a liberation, freeing him to explore characters that more conventionally handsome actors could never have touched. What made Lawton extraordinary was his willingness to use his body as a tool of transformation. He understood that physicality was not merely about appearance, but about the way a body moved through space, the way it occupied a room, the way it communicated character without words. Whether playing a British butler, a Roman emperor, or a deranged preacher, he inhabited each role completely, his substantial frame somehow becoming exactly what the character required. His personal life was marked by struggle and secrecy, particularly regarding his homosexuality in an era when such things could destroy careers. Perhaps his ability to transform himself on screen was connected to this need to hide his true self off-screen. Whatever the source of his genius, Lawton proved that physical beauty was irrelevant to great acting, that a body deemed imperfect by Hollywood standards could become the vessel for performances that would endure for generations. Robert Morley. If Hollywood needed an actor to play a pompous, portly British gentleman with a twinkle in his eye and a glass of brandy in his hand, Robert Morley was the first call. Standing 6 feet tall and often weighing between 220 and 250 pounds, he made a long and distinguished career out of his round face, his prominent double chin, and his ability to bring charm to characters who might otherwise have been insufferable. Morley understood that his physical type came with certain expectations, and he met them brilliantly while subtly subverting them. Yes, he played eccentric aristocrats and fussy upper-class gentlemen, but he brought to these roles a warmth and wit that elevated them beyond stereotype. In The African Queen, playing Katharine Hepburn's brother, his plump figure in a missionary's white suit perfectly established the sheltered, civilized world that the rest of the film would tear away. In Oscar Wilde, he portrayed the famous playwright with a sensitivity that honored the man's genius while acknowledging his appetites. Throughout his career, Morley used his weight as a tool of characterization. His characters were often gluttonous, yes, but they were also cultured, intelligent, and frequently more perceptive than the sleeker characters around them. He refused to allow his size to become a punchline, instead making it a source of distinction and even dignity. When he spoke, audiences listened, his physical presence commanding attention in a way that had nothing to do with conventional attractiveness. Morley worked steadily in film, television, and theater for over 5 decades, proof that there was always a place in entertainment for a talented actor regardless of his measurements. His legacy is a reminder that character actors, those invaluable supporting players who give depth and texture to every production, are as essential to cinema as any leading man. Marilyn Monroe. The assertion that Marilyn Monroe was fat is a persistent modern myth that reveals more about our current distorted standards than about the actress herself. Standing 5 feet 5 inches and typically weighing between 118 and 140 pounds, Monroe possessed the famously voluptuous figure that was not merely accepted in the 1950s, but actively worshipped as the pinnacle of female beauty. Her measurements, reportedly 35, 22, 35, created the hourglass silhouette that launched a million imitators and remains iconic to this day. Her dress size, typically an 8 or 10 by modern measurements, would have been considered perfectly proportioned in her era. When she walked, when she posed, When she breathed on screen, she did so as the embodiment of what American culture had decided was the ideal female form. What the modern misconception about Monroe's size reveals is how dramatically standards of beauty have shifted in the intervening decades. The curves that made her a goddess in 1955 would be considered plus size on many contemporary red carpets. The softness of her body, the roundness of her hips, the fullness of her breasts, all of these would likely be criticized or edited in today's Photoshop-obsessed culture. Monroe's body was real, tangible, and human in ways that have become increasingly rare in our age of filters and surgical enhancement. Monroe herself was acutely aware of her body and worked hard to present it in its best light. She knew exactly how to pose, how to move, how to use light and shadow to emphasize her curves. Her physicality was a carefully crafted performance as much as any scene she played. Yet there was also something genuine about her appeal, something that transcended technique. She was beautiful, not because she conformed to some abstract standard. Jane Mansfield. If Marilyn Monroe was the voluptuous ideal of the 1950s, Jane Mansfield was that ideal pushed to its logical, cartoonish extreme. Standing 5 feet 5 inches and weighing around 120 pounds, her measurements were reported as an almost impossible 40, 21, 35, with a bust size that seemed designed to test the structural limits of the era's torpedo bras. Mansfield was marketed explicitly as a rival to Monroe, and her strategy was simple: more. More curves, more platinum blonde hair, more cleavage, more scandal. She was one of the first major stars to pose for Playboy, and she built her entire brand around her impossible figure. Her pink mansion, her pink car, her pink everything created a world of deliberate excess that perfectly complemented her physical abundance. There was something almost subversive about Mansfield's approach to her own body. She understood that Hollywood was selling sex, and she decided to sell it more blatantly than anyone before her. Her figure was deliberately over the top, a parody of femininity that she leaned into with knowing wit. She was smarter than her image suggested, reportedly with an IQ of 163, and her willingness to play the dumb blonde was a calculated performance. Like Monroe, Mansfield was celebrated in her era for being curvy in ways that would be considered unusual today. But where Monroe's curves seemed natural and effortless, Mansfield's were proudly, almost aggressively artificial. She was not just voluptuous. She was a monument to voluptuousness, a walking, talking advertisement for the pleasures of the flesh. Her tragic death in a car accident at 34 cut short a career that had already begun to fade. But her image endures as a time capsule of an era when female beauty meant abundance rather than absence. Peter Lorre. Peter Lorre was never a large man by Hollywood standards, standing just 5 feet 5 inches and weighing between 140 and 150 pounds. But his soft, doughy physique was as essential to his screen presence as his bulging, mournful eyes and his distinctive, high-pitched voice. Together, these physical traits created one of cinema's most unsettling and unforgettable presences. Lorre's body seemed designed to convey weakness, vulnerability, and something slightly unwholesome. His rounded features and soft belly made him appear physically non-threatening, which only amplified the psychological menace of his characters. As Joel Cairo in The Maltese Falcon, his petulant, perfumed villain seems almost harmless, which makes his capacity for violence all the more disturbing. The contrast between his soft exterior and his hard interior was the key to his appeal. His frequent pairing with Sidney Greenstreet exploited this physical dynamic brilliantly. Greenstreet was massive, calm, and calculating. Laurie was small, nervous, and twitchy. Together, they created a visual shorthand for a particular type of sophisticated criminality, the kind where brains mattered more than brawn. Laurie's slight frame darting around Green Street's immense bulk created images that audiences never forgot. Throughout his career, Laurie brought a tragic quality to even his most villainous roles. There was always something sad about his characters, something that suggested a wounded humanity beneath the surface menace. His body contributed to this impression, suggesting a man who had been shaped by forces beyond his control, who had learned to survive through cunning rather than strength. In Hollywood's gallery of memorable character actors, Laurie occupies a unique place, his unconventional physicality, the foundation of a career that continues to influence actors and filmmakers to this day. Jackie Gleason. Jackie Gleason was larger than life in every possible sense, a personality so enormous that only an equally enormous physical presence could contain it. Standing 5 feet 11 inches and frequently weighing between 250 and 300 pounds, Gleason dominated 1950s television with a combination of physical comedy, emotional depth, and sheer overwhelming presence that made him one of the greatest entertainers of his era. His most famous creation, Ralph Cramden of the Honeymooners, was built directly on Gleason's substantial frame. Ralph was a bus driver with dreams that exceeded his circumstances, a man whose blustery threats and grand schemes were constantly undermined by reality. Gleason's immense size made Ralph both intimidating and sympathetic. When he bellowed his famous threats, "One of these days, Alice, pow, right in the kisser," his bulk made the comedy work. Audiences knew Ralph would never follow through, but his size made the threat believable enough to be funny. Beyond comedy, Gleason used his physicality to explore dramatic territory that lesser performers couldn't reach. His portrayal of Minnesota Fats in The Hustler, opposite Paul Newman, demonstrated that his large body could convey stillness and menace as effectively as broad comedy. As the legendary pool hustler, his bulk suggested a man who had seen everything, who couldn't be rattled, who had long since transcended the petty concerns of physical appearance. Gleason's weight was a health concern throughout his life, and he made numerous attempts to slim down with varying success. But ultimately, his size was inseparable from his talent. It was not merely that audiences accepted him despite his weight, they loved him because of the totality of who he was, physical presence included. He proved that television could accommodate performers who didn't fit any conventional mold. And his influence can be seen in every sitcom that has dared to center an unconventional body since. Ethel Waters. Ethel Waters occupied a unique position in Hollywood history, a groundbreaking African-American entertainer whose powerful, heavy-set presence challenged multiple conventions simultaneously. Standing 5 feet 4 inches, with a substantial build that was never precisely documented in the measurements-obsessed way that white actresses' bodies were, she brought to the screen a combination of gravitas, strength, and maternal warmth that was revolutionary for its time. Waters had begun her career as a blues singer, her voice conveying depths of emotional experience that transcended any physical description. When she transitioned to acting, she brought that same emotional power to her performances, her body becoming a vessel for characters of extraordinary depth and humanity. In Member of the Wedding, her performance as the loving housekeeper Berenice earned her an Academy Award nomination, a remarkable achievement for a black actress in 1952. Her size was never treated as a comedic element or a source of mockery, as black women's bodies too often were in Hollywood productions of that era. Instead, her physicality conveyed strength and endurance, suggesting a woman who had survived hardships that the film's white characters could barely imagine. When she commanded a scene, audiences felt the weight of her presence in the most profound sense, a weight that had nothing to do with pounds and everything to do with the soul. Waters' career was a triumph over obstacles that would have defeated lesser performers. She navigated the racist structures of the entertainment industry while maintaining her dignity and her art. Her body, in all its substantial presence, was a testament to that survival, a physical manifestation of a spirit that refused to be diminished. In an era when Hollywood rarely allowed black performers any complexity, Waters carved out space for characters of genuine humanity. Victor Mature. Victor Mature represented a particular type of Golden Age masculinity, the beefcake hero, a man of impressive physical stature whose muscles were as important as his acting ability. Standing 6 feet 2 inches and weighing approximately 210 pounds of well-distributed muscle in his prime, Mature was one of Hollywood's premier leading men in the 1940s and 50s, a ruggedly handsome star who embodied heroic figures from Samson to Doc Holliday. His breakthrough role as Samson in Samson and Delilah showcased exactly what Hollywood valued in him: a broad-shouldered, muscular physique that looked believable, bringing down temples and slaying lions. Mature was not a subtle actor, but he didn't need to be. His body did much of the acting for him, communicating strength, virility, and heroic capability without requiring extensive dialogue. In an era of biblical epics and historical adventures, a man who looked good in a loincloth was worth his weight in gold. But like so many physical specimens of Hollywood's golden age, Mature could not outrun time. As he aged and his film career slowed, he gained a significant amount of weight, eventually exceeding 250 pounds. The contrast between the chiseled leading man of his youth and the heavy-set older man he became was stark, a visual reminder that Hollywood's physical standards are not merely arbitrary, but impossible to maintain indefinitely. Mature himself seemed to accept this transformation with good humor, famously joking that he was never much of an actor anyway. His self-deprecation masked a more serious truth about the film industry's treatment of its physical performers. Those who are valued primarily for their bodies face a peculiar obsolescence, their careers ending not when their talent fades, but when their physiques no longer match the industry's expectations. Mature's trajectory from beefcake to retirement was a journey that many stars would take, a reminder that in Hollywood, the body is both asset and liability. These 15 figures represent a Hollywood that was simultaneously more accepting and more complicated in its relationship with bodies than our current era. They were celebrated, scrutinized, and remembered for physical presences that told stories all their own. In examining their heights, their weights, and the roles their bodies played in their careers, we glimpse a time when the silver screen could accommodate a wider range of human forms, when stars could be heavy-set or voluptuous or unconventional and still command the devotion of millions. The lessons of these Golden Age stars extend far beyond historical curiosity. They remind us that beauty standards are neither fixed nor natural, that the bodies worshipped in one era may be criticized in another, and that true star power ultimately transcends any measurement. What made these performers immortal was not their conformity to any physical ideal, but their ability to transform their bodies, whatever their shape, into instruments of art, entertainment, and profound human expression.